Jesus, my webcam is small. Yeah, a little bit bigger. She said. Yeah, damn right, bro. How's it going, RK? Good evening to you too, buddy. Give me a second. Don't mind this. I'm just pinning this, so it can be, you know, donate money and I make money out of this shit, so I can quit my job. You know what I mean? Anyway, we're gonna watch this video on Zionism. Wow. So enjoy that. And yeah. Play some Minecraft. I was gonna make a hardcore.
Zionism, its character, the decisions that come out of it, affects and shapes other nations of the world, namely the Arab nations around it, while the other nations of the world reciprocally affect
What's going on with my
and shape
chat?
Zionism, which is to say
Based. Okay. Why's my chat not updating? Okay, now it's working. Okay, cool. That was annoying me. Sorry about that. Going okay. Was going to bed after thinking about business management strats for work, but I got a bit of time to watch you. Thanks, man.
Is largely
I
based
appreciate it. I love that this keeps minimizing.
If
anyway.
Israel had different neighbors, for example, the character of its nationalism would almost certainly be different. I think the best thing I can do here is to go through the history, to at least go through the major developments, the landmark
we'll call it
events that have shaped
Israel,
Zionism, or that have been caused by Zionism. It will also lay out the foundations of the modern Israel-Palestine conflict.
All right, let's go.
As it's Zionism's biggest conflict, a conflict fundamentally based in nationalism.
True.
Two rival nationalisms competing over the same land.
We're in the middle of a fucking desert, man.
Primary driver of events, but not always, and perhaps not always cleanly.
Jesus, what a
shitty biome. But rather focus on narrating the history, only stopping to point out shifts in Zionism when they occur. The history is famously long and complicated, but I think it can be clearly understood when broken down into three major developments. The first, and perhaps the most important, is the period around 1948.
1948, buddy.
Right where we left off. We can start by taking stock of the situation coming out of the Arab-Israeli War. Consider the perspective of Israelis. This was the time they gave birth to their state, and what a time it was. In a span of just around 6 or 7 years, the people who are now calling themselves Israelis had experienced the Holocaust. They had fought a civil war against Arab Palestinians.
Is the Holocaust like the Gaza genocide? Is there anything like that?
Immediately after declaring their state, had been attacked by 5 Arab neighboring states and won. Israelis widely thought that their survival was miraculous. It was a modern story of David against Goliath. And they hadn't just won, but gained perhaps the most precious prize of all. Zionists had originally been offered around 20% of Palestine by the British in 1937, an offer they tentatively
there's a village, I think,
that Arabs rejected. 10 years later, the UN approved Jews getting around 55% of Palestine.
The fuck is that?
About a year after that, by the end of the war, Israelis had around 80% of it. Palestinians had nothing. Jordan annexed the West Bank, while Egypt administered the Gaza Strip. There was a tremendous sense of momentum for Israelis, of accomplishment. As a legislative council put it during the war, everyone is moving.
Oh, this biome's kind of cool.
Momentum. Everyone is tense and ready. It is hardly surprising that one wakes up at 5 in the morning,
you thought in what, mate?
Despite working hard till late at night. Who can sleep at a time like this? Who would not do anything to live this time? Even more awake, even more intensively, even closer.
It's an armadillo. Guys, look, it's an armadillo. Wow, and a cave.
And unifying.
Wow. Wow.
They created a state the Zionists had always
freaking love Minecraft,
Jews,
guys!
anywhere in the world, were free to immigrate to and become citizens, in a land where they could live as the dominant nation, free from anti-Semitism. If Jews anywhere in the world wanted to move to Israel, Israel, by law, had to take them in.
Israel was created not for the purpose of winning wars. Israel was created to safeguard the life of the entire Jewish people. Israel was created so that every Jew knows that he can come home when he has to or when he wants to.
Within a few years, a massive flow of immigration made their population almost double. A major factor was rising anti-Semitism in Arab states, causing virtually all Jews in those states to move away, mostly to Israel. Paradoxically, the existence of Israel was causing anti-Semitism, which in turn made Jews flee to Israel, validating the purpose of its existence. One might be tempted to push back here and say that it's not Israel's existence that was causing anti-Semitism, but Israel's behavior. But according to my research, at least at this point in time, that's not accurate. Zionism to Arabs was an inherently aggressive colonial movement. Israel was a colonial state that unjustly stole land from Arabs.
How dare they?
That was the fundamental grievance. Stories about Jewish atrocities circulated widely during the time across the Arab world, but most of them weren't true. Because Arabs felt so negatively towards Israel, they were willing to believe just about anything negative that they heard about it. Its existence was the fundamental grievance, the root cause of the negativity. Going forward, Arab states refused to recognize its existence. They avoided even using its name, calling it the Zionist entity. Meanwhile, in Israel, it was a time notable for its unity.
You guys are crazy.
Its various militias, with some tension, were turned into one united Israeli army. The Israeli
Is there any sound?
Force,
I didn't even know.
Or the IDF.
Nice.
Israel was governed almost monolithically.
Green dye and a book and clay? Wow.
Sweeping powers. Ideologically, there was a notion that the general public, especially the arriving immigrants, had to conform to the dominant culture, which at the time was secular, Eurocentric, essentially Ashkenazi. The new immigrants were human dust, as Ben Gurion put it, lacking language, education, roots, tradition, or national dreams. They were human dust that had to be given form. However dramatic the triumph and cohesion of Israel was during the period, there was perhaps an even greater drama of the time: the reciprocal and utter collapse of Palestine. Zionism had once been seen, mostly by Jews, as a movement that would benefit both Jews and Arabs. It was thought that they could live together, side by side, and mutually enjoy rising living standards, rising prosperity. But by 1948, it had become a conflict that was zero-sum. Gains for one side meant a loss for the other. As the Civil War and the Arab-Israeli War played out, and the Arabs' defeat by Israel became obvious, a term was coined by a Syrian intellectual named Constantine Zurich. It was a Nakba, a disaster or a catastrophe. The defeat of the Arabs in Palestine, he said, is no simple setback or light passing evil. It is a Nakba in every sense of the word. He was disappointed by the disconnect between Arab rhetoric and Arab reality. Arabs had suffered a humiliating defeat and seemingly put little effort into the cause. Declarations fall like bombs, he said, from the mouths of officials at the meetings of the Arab League. But when action becomes necessary, the fire is still and quiet. The steel and iron are rusted and twisted, quick to bend and disintegrate. The bombs are hollow and empty. They cause no damage and kill no one. The period was a humiliation for Arab states.
Whoa.
For Arab Palestinians, it was ruinous. By the end of the war, their institutions were non-existent. Their leaders had been killed, exiled, or discredited. Perhaps worst of all, their population was scattered. As Constantine Zurich put it, 400,000 or more Arabs are forced to flee pell-mell from their homes. They have their wealth and property stripped from them and wander like madmen in what is left of Palestine and in the other Arab countries. They do not know what fate has in store for them, nor what means of livelihood they should seek. They wonder whether they will be forced to return to their homes, there to live under the Zionist shadow and to bear whatever abuse or scorn, assimilation or extinction, the Zionists may impose on them. By the end of the war, the number of refugees had reached around 700,000, about half of Arab Palestinians. Many, perhaps around half, had fled, having heard rumors about Jewish war crimes, or wanting to avoid the dangers of war. They widely believed they'd be able to return to their homes once the Arab powers were victorious. To their surprise, Arabs lost. Then the victor, Israel, would not allow them to return. But many others, again perhaps around half, were forcefully driven from their homes, as the Israeli military implemented what they called Plan D. During that time of war, Arabs within the borders of Israel were seen as a potential enemy population. Removing that threat, or potential threat, by pushing them out of the state of Israel, can be seen in a sense as a largely defensive and practical wartime measure. But there's also a broader, more controversial side to the story. The area that had been allocated to Israel by the UN.
What up, Mooks? How's it going, buddy?
At the time was around half Jewish and half Arab. That created for Israelis a concern about demographics. If Arabs ever outnumbered Jews in the state of Israel, Jews could democratically lose control of their state. Arabs could simply vote it out of existence. To ensure the survival of their state then, Jews had to make sure that Arabs in Israel never outnumbered them. Arabs in Israel, rightly or wrongly, would always be a minority. Basically equal in rights, but effectively a second class. Plan D can be seen as a, perhaps not explicit, but implicit way to create those conditions. By removing as many Arabs as possible under the pretense of war, they ironically secured Israel's democratic state. Hundreds of villages were depopulated, many destroyed, others resettled by Jews, their names refashioned into Hebrew ones. As Ben Gurion explained, we are obliged to remove the Arabic names for reasons of state.
Wow.
Just as we do not recognize the Arabs' political proprietorship of the land, so also do we not recognize their spiritual proprietorship and their names. Considering their circumstances, it was a move that felt perhaps
I'm going to restart because this biome sucks.
But for Arabs, it was yet another humiliation, yet another grievance. Most refugees went to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The rest were displaced across the Middle East.
Time for Israel number 2. All right, see, this is a little bit better.
Political bloc, broken.
Let's have a look around.
The very notion of Palestine and Palestinian identity was put into question and even suppressed.
Do you mind if I tell you about a very special person that we all need in our life?
Israel had no interest in
is it Markiplier?
Palestinians as a people. Palestine and Palestinian statehood was now considered an...
I have a challenge. Build a house made of only dirt. No.
For the construction of an
How dare you?
Palestinian state.
It's a jungle biome. Let's go get ourselves some birds, bro. Would you fuck?
The Arab states claimed to speak for Palestinians.
I love birds.
Grant Palestinian statehood. Granting Palestinian statehood in what was
left of Palestine
would, in a sense, recognize Israel's existence. Palestinians,
it's
furthermore, if granted power
I don't have any seeds.
Could act as...
I have a seed.
People
I haven't tamed them.
Already tense.
We need more seed.
In 1949, armistice agreements, not peace agreements, were made, formally ending the fighting between Israel and the Arab nations around it. In the maps of those agreements, the name Palestine was dropped.
All right, let's see how we go.
So that was the first major development. Because of how the period unfolded, Israel exists. Israel found national unity, national strength, national energy.
No!
But it also had to fight its existence. A fight that it was, furthermore, rewarded
I want the burb.
But it was success that came at the expense of Palestinians, who emerged from the period broken. They were broken in a manner that they would not forget.
Yes!
For the time, though,
we have the bird.
Focused. It shifted away.
What do we name the bird?
And became focused as a conflict between Israel and its neighboring Arab states. It was a conflict that climaxed in a world-changing war
them this?
in 1967. A war that resulted from a showdown between Israel and the president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser.
That's what I did when I played
After
in 2012. Call
Israel
it crowd?
was not at peace with any of the 5 states that had attacked it. Israelis argued
I'll call it Norm Finkelstein Jr.
But they would only accept peace in the right circumstances. As Ben Gurion put it, I am prepared to get up in the middle of the night in order to sign a peace agreement, but I am not in a hurry and I can wait 10 years. We are under no pressure whatsoever.
Normal.
Israelis felt strong, believing they could.
It's actually a man named Jesus Christ. So basically, around 2,000 years ago, he died on a cross to forgive all of our sin.
Crucially, the Arab states
and the
also
Bible
felt they had to
called
negotiate
us
with Israel
as
on
his
position
children. And if we believe and have
Israel on
faith,
position of
we
weakness,
can live with him in
public
heaven
backlash
forever.
could be fatal to their governments.
All right, Floofy.
The Arab states held a hard line against Israel.
I'm gonna tell you something, and it's not gonna make you happy. No, I'm sorry, Bertie. Hit my bird. Okay. Luffy, I have something important to tell you. There is no afterlife. When you die, what actually happens is you end up in another dimension where all you have is gay sex all the time. Non-stop gay sex. So, I know this is against what you believed were Christian values, but that is what will happen. Jesus was famously a gay man. Oh my God! Man. Oh my God! I love him. I love my bird. Why do you do this to me? Stay there. Fucking, I don't know what the fuck Norm Finkelstein's doing, but Junior. Jesus loves you, man. All right, and if you ever need anyone to talk to about anything, he's only one prayer away. Well, if I wanted to talk to nobody, yeah, that would be, you know, a pretty good way of getting that done. I don't need a magic person, you know? I've got the magic of friendship all around me, you know? Bye, Floofy. Please don't do that anymore. Nobody asked. Aha. Rude. Okay, take back the cheers. Take it back immediately. Tell them to get fucked. Be mean. God damn it. We're building a bamboo house. I do what I want. Oh wait, don't I need string? Oh no! Can I just do that? No, I can just do that. And then I can do that. Cool. Okay. No, but not a dirt house, Sage. I will not build a dirt house, no. Dirt is the enemy of the bamboo people. Not gonna lie, Bamboo House sounds good. It is very good. Okay, it's nice and cool because you're in, you know, you're actually I should do these ones so it regrows. You know, I want to get rid of all the bamboo. And then we go and live up in one of the trees, bro. It's feng shui. True. Oh my lord. Okay, and then do that. And look at that. That took so much effort, but we got the bamboo a little bit. Let's kill this chicken to death. Dear God, I thank you for the stream. Dude, shut up. This cringe shit. Or a ban. Here we go. Bro, I hate this. Why is this so bad? Here we go. Oh my God, I hate my life. Here we go. We go. Put user in timeout. There we go. Bye-bye. Fucking Christians coming in here. Stinking up the place. We don't need none of that shit here. Sorry, Floofy. I appreciate your faith and stuff. How dare you? The only thing I appreciate is his silence. Muhahaha. Yeah, let's go kill that chicken. I want Mr. Chicken. Hello? Thank you. Rest in peace. Oh yeah, the video.
While Israel held a hard line back in return. Talks were held, but given the circumstances, peace couldn't be made. There were two major sticking points. One was land. Israel wanted as much land as it could hold, while the Arabs
the chickens look yummier than I remember.
Israel had gained during the Arab-Israeli
They are
War.
delicious.
The other point was the Palestinian refugees, who were allowed, and even to some extent forced, to assimilate into Jordan, but everywhere else existed in a sort of state of limbo, mostly held in camps where they waited for the crisis to resolve. Israel held that the refugees were not its problem, as it had not started the wars that created them. The Arab states held that the refugees were its problem. Israel was a colonial state, making its existence inherently aggressive. Any refugees created because of Arab resistance to the colonization was, in their eyes,
but that ain't that Christian Minecraft. It is not a Christian Minecraft server.
So the Arab states, besides Jordan, didn't allow the refugees to assimilate and insisted they be returned to Israel, while Israel refused, even for the simple reason of demographics. Meanwhile, in Israel, two broad paths developed for foreign policy. They were originally labeled by Israelis as activism versus moderation, and were relabeled during the Vietnam era as hawkishness versus dovishness. But one could also roughly label it in Zionist terms. There was the Zionist right and the Zionist left, a left and right-wing view on Zionist policy. The left emphasized international cooperation and understanding. They were the ones who, in this context, wanted to empathize with Arabs and create peace through connection, diplomacy, and the avoidance of violence. The Zionist left were sensitive to Israel's standing in the world and wanted Israel to act in a way that brought it honor and respect in the eyes of the rest of the world. Israel briefly had a genuine left-wing nationalist as their leader, Moshe Sharett, who served as their second prime minister. He distinguished himself, for example, by saying, "Arabs have extremely subtle understanding and delicate senses.
That's a caveat.
It is true there is a wall between us and them, and there is a tragic development in that this wall is getting taller. But nonetheless, if this wall can be prevented from getting taller, it is a sacred duty to do so, if at all possible." But his politics serve as a sort of path never taken. His term was brief. Israeli policy, in terms of nationalism, coming out of 1948, would be dominated by the right. Right-wing nationalists, or in Israel's case, right-wing Zionists, have a point of view that centers much more around their own nation. They put the needs of their own nation first and deprioritize their relations with other nations, the effects their actions have on other nations. In a word, right-wing Zionists are particularist. They do whatever their own nation needs, while left-wing Zionists are universalist. They emphasize solidarity and harmony between nations. For the first decades of Israeli politics, Ben-Gurion led Israel down the path of the right. He had socialist views that make him in some ways a leftist, but as a nationalist, Ben-Gurion was on the right. He held, you could say justifiably, the view that Israel was threatened.
Did so much damage.
Its existence was not secure. The Arab states were
pretty
the
much
cause of that threat.
Self-interest versus
The threat, he
cooperation.
thought, came from a fundamental difference between Jewish and Arab character. Jews, he thought, were civilized and law-abiding. Arabs were primitive and violent. We live in the 20th century, he said. They in the 15th. Peace deals could be made, for example, but they could also be broken, so they could not be made if they made Israel fundamentally weak. The only reliable tool Israel had to deal with Arabs, he thought, was force. He also didn't trust other nations of the world to keep Israel safe, which meant that Israel's survival, for the time, would be based on its own military strength. It was Ben-Gurion's interpretation of the new Zionist man, the idea that Zionism was causing Jews to be reborn, tough and assertive. For example, contrasting himself against Moshe Sharett's emphasis on diplomacy and restraint, he said, "He is raising a generation of cowards. I will not let him. I will not let him. This will be a fighting generation." Besides peace agreements, Israel had to deal with the question of breaches of its sovereignty. As soon as the fighting ended in 1949, Arabs, mostly Palestinians, began crossing into the state of Israel illegally, in what Israelis called infiltrations. It was often done naively, Palestinians trying to return home, not realizing they were breaching Israeli sovereignty. Ben-Gurion believed that Israel needed secure borders, and that force was the only reliable tool to secure them. Israel developed a policy of shooting infiltrators on sight. The infiltrations didn't stop, and instead became more violent over time. These violent infiltrations were often actively supported by, or passively tolerated by, the Arab governments around them. Israel developed a policy of responding to violent infiltrations with overwhelming force. Strikes back in the territories where the attacks came from. What became known as reprisal raids. They were designed to send the message that the killing of Israelis would be prohibitively expensive. "Kill one of us," they said, "and we'll kill many more of you." A reprisal raid in Kibbutz, Jordan in 1953 was especially violent, killing perhaps 69 civilians. The Kibbutz raid gained
69
attention and brought Israel worldwide condemnation. The raid's commander, Ariel Sharon, recalled Ben-Gurion's words debriefing him, saying, "It doesn't make any real difference what will be said about Kibbutz around the world.
I might be.
The important thing is how it will be looked at here in this region. This is going to give us the possibility of living here." By the mid-50s, enough back-and-forth violence had occurred that it became clear to Israelis that they would have to fundamentally live a violent existence. In 1956, a farmer was killed by Palestinian infiltrators. His body was brought back to Gaza and mutilated. The IDF's chief of staff at the time, Moshe Dayan, gave a eulogy at his funeral that would go on to be legendary in Israeli culture. He said, "Let us not today fling accusations at the murderers. What cause have we to complain about their fierce hatred for us? For 8 years now, they sit in their refugee camps in Gaza, and before their eyes, we turn into our homestead, the land and villages in which they and their forefathers have lived. Let us not be afraid to see the hatred that accompanies and consumes the lives of hundreds of thousands of Arabs who sit all around us and await the moment when their hand will be able to reach our blood. Let us not avert our gaze, for it will weaken our hand. This is the fate of our generation. The only choice we have is to be prepared and armed, strong and resolute, or else our sword will slip from our hand, and the thread of our lives will be severed." Meanwhile, in Egypt, after the Arab-Israeli War, a group of officers have been disgusted by the performance of their country. They blamed their monarchical government, its failure betraying its corruption and its incompetence. In 1952, they staged a coup, successfully toppling it. A power struggle played out between the officers, culminating in the rise of a strongman president, Gamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser, first and foremost, wanted to strengthen and reinvigorate Egypt. He had fought in Palestine during the Arab-Israeli War, but even then he recalled, "We were fighting in Palestine, but our dreams were in Egypt. We spoke of nothing but our country and how to deliver it." As a secondary aim, he focused on cohesively uniting the Arab world, a goal called Pan-Arabism. He created a brand of Arab nationalism, secular in nature and tied to his name, eventually called Nasserism. Arabs were one people, he claimed, who should eventually form one united nation. It was an idea he broadcasted widely over radio, through the stations Voice of the Arabs and Radio Cairo. As an issue that could bring Arabs together, Nasser emphasized the platform of anti-imperialism, as European powers, namely Britain and France, long held and to some extent still held power in Arabic-speaking countries. Israel was also seen as a Western colonial state. As Nasser brought the Arabic world together through radio, he emphasized anti-imperialism against the West in general, and anti-Zionism against Israel in particular.
The Arab of Palestine want to return back to their homeland, to regain their property. What was the answer of the Israelis? The answer of the Israelis was no. They will not permit single Arab to return, and they will not give them back their property. What we can do, the Arabs? If you have a right and nobody is ready to give it to you, so the only solution is force.
As Nasser was coming into power, peace talks were secretly held between the Israeli and Egyptian governments, but the talks failed. Egypt wanted Israel to cede the Negev Desert, land that had been allocated to it by the UN. By 1953, Israel for years had been carrying out their policy of shooting infiltrators on sight, but none of their high-profile reprisal raids had yet occurred. They had tried working with Egypt to end the infiltrations, but were unsatisfied with the results. Egypt then, under Nasser, began raising hostilities, sending into Israel a group of mine layers and saboteurs, and publicly calling for a second round of fighting. He also sent an intelligence gathering mission in 1954, during which, in Israel, they killed an Israeli cyclist. In the grand scheme of things, all relatively small provocations. Israel responded maximally, plotting a false flag mission in 1954, which, had it not been discovered, would have bombed empty British and American buildings in Cairo and blamed it on the Egyptians. In 1955, Israel sent a reprisal raid into Gaza, gaining widespread attention and killing, perhaps, 38 Egyptian soldiers. Egypt escalated further, actively training and sending militant Fedayeen squads into Israel, Fedayeen meaning self-sacrificers in Arabic. It also closed to Israel the Straits of Tiran, shutting it off from Asia and much of Africa. The Soviet Union began selling arms to Egypt, strengthening it and further establishing it as the leading Arabic power. With relations breaking down and feeling ever more threatened, Ben-Gurion argued that Israel had a right, even a duty, to overthrow Nasser. It is definitely possible to topple him, he said, and it is even a mitzvah, a sacred obligation to do so. Who is he anyway, this Nasser Schmasser?
Cook that chicken, don't tell me what to do.
In 1956, Nasser needed funding for the massive Aswan Dam.
But yeah, I will.
The United States denied him a loan. Nasser found the funds then by nationalizing the Suez Canal, taking it from a Franco-British company. Nasser was widely seen as a growing threat and was widely likened to being a new Arabic Hitler, an expansion-crazed nationalist. The British, French, and Israelis then, all for their own reasons, decided to launch a coordinated invasion to try to topple him. The three countries landed in the Sinai Peninsula and headed for Cairo, in an attack widely called the Suez Crisis. It was an attack begun by Israel and thinly framed as a response to Egyptian aggression. Nasser, understandably, believed he didn't have the power to stop the three armies. He reportedly had poison brought to him in Cairo, preferring death over capture. The United States, though, intervened and stopped the aggression. The Arabic world was paying attention. Having nationalized the Suez Canal and having survived the Suez Crisis, Nasser's popularity across the Arab world soared. France and Britain were humiliated and further withdrew from the Middle East. Israel was widely condemned and further aggravated Arab opinion around it. But it also benefited from the crisis. It regained access to the Straits of Tiran, while UN soldiers were placed on the Egyptian border, putting a stop to Fedayeen attacks. Israel also drew closer to France, a relationship granting it arms deals, notably cutting-edge Mirage jets, and also eventually nuclear capabilities, which would lead in about a decade to nuclear weapons. By that point, there was an established, even implicit sense of anti-Zionism in Arabic culture. As a historian of Arab nationalism put it, the accepted assumption throughout the Arab world was that the illegitimate entity, Israel, was behind every ill that befell the Arab world. But for about the next 7 years, Israel, as an overt subject, fell into the background. Arabs, instead, focused on the question of unification. Could the Arab states come together and form a united nation, or not? By 1963, the answer seemed to be no. Attempts to fuse together Arab states had failed, and Egypt was embroiled in a costly, humiliating civil war over the question in Yemen. Meanwhile, Israel needed water for its rapidly growing population, thanks to immigration. A project was finishing that diverted water that would have fed into the Jordan River, a river used by both Israel and Arab states. The plan had been produced by the US and approved by both Israeli and Arab engineers, but the Arab League never ratified it. Israel went ahead with the plan anyway. Arabs saw it as a provocation. They focused their attention back onto Israel, rallying again behind Nasser. The Arab League made a statement. The establishment of Israel is the basic threat that the Arab nation in its entirety has agreed to forestall. And since the existence of Israel is a danger that threatens the Arab nation, the diversion of the Jordan waters by it multiplies the dangers to Arab existence. Accordingly, the Arab states have to prepare the plans necessary for dealing with the political, economic, and social aspects, so that if the necessary results are not achieved, collective Arab military preparations, when they are completed, will constitute the ultimate practical means for the final liquidation of Israel. For the first time, the Arab states collectively and officially declared a final aim of liquidating Israel. Language which, of course, is reminiscent of the Holocaust. To Israelis, it seemed to vindicate their fears and suspicions. They were surrounded by neighbors that hated them and wanted them destroyed. But Israelis would continue to take a hard line dealing with them. When Syria began a diversion project of its own, Israel responded with artillery, shelling them. Conflicts broke out across the Israeli-Syrian border. In Syria, extremists staged a coup, toppling the government. As Syria's new leaders, they were ideologically committed to a revolutionary struggle against Israel.
This guy makes really good
Violence
videos.
on the border intensified. War, it seemed, was in the air. Egypt signed a defense pact with Syria. Escalations continued. In an air battle, Israeli jets shot down 6 Syrian planes, then subjected Syrians in Damascus to a public humiliation, flying over the city and performing acrobatics. Russia warned Egypt, falsely, that the Israeli army was mobilizing. Egypt knew the information was false, but still escalated. It sent its army into the Sinai Peninsula, up to the Israeli border. It expelled the UN peacekeepers, and again blocked the Straits of Tiran from Israeli shipping, a move Israel considered an act of war. The Arab publics and Arab states all leaned into the mood of war. Calls for Israel's destruction were rampant.
Could I ask His Majesty what sequence of events he would like to see now in the Middle East?
The first thing is the extermination of Israel.
Our forces are in a complete state of readiness for war, Radio Cairo said. Brothers, it is our duty to prepare for the final battle in Palestine, said Nasser.
Yeah, go for it, man.
Syria's
You're all
Minister
good.
of Defense,
Lay down.
Hafez al-Assad, said, it was high time to take the initiative in destroying the Zionist presence in the Arab homeland. Jewish effigies were hung in intersections across Cairo. Radio Cairo ran a song saying, slaughter, slaughter, slaughter. It was an anxious time in Israel. The Arab armies vastly outnumbered them. Perhaps this time they'd be better organized and more united. Perhaps this time Israel faced a challenge it couldn't meet. Israeli leadership was cautiously confident. As the IDF's chief of staff, Yitzhak Rabin, said, it will be a terribly hard war with many casualties, but we can beat the Egyptian army. Their prime minister, Levi Eshkol, wanted to avoid war. We pursue our diplomatic options to the end, he said. Rabin mobilized Israel's reserve army, an escalation that among Israelis was divisive. Ben-Gurion, in retirement, condemned the decision. We have been forced into a very difficult situation, he said. I very much doubt whether Nasser wanted to go to war, and now we're in serious trouble. One Arab state after the other signed defense pacts with Nasser, while beginning to mobilize their armies as well. Egypt's mobilization was complete, with around 100,000 soldiers on the Israeli border. Its generals were confident. We will never be in a better position than now, they told Nasser. Our forces are well equipped and trained. We will have all the advantages of attacking first. We are sure of victory. Egypt's escalations had now carried it to the brink of war. Israel's unflinching hardline policy meant it walked in step, escalating in return. If a war was to happen, then, who would win? Arabs thought they could win, especially if they struck first. Israelis also thought they could win, but their confidence relied on a plan, one that had been in the works for years. The plan involved them striking first. But that left both sides with a dilemma involving the United States. Israel had been fostering closer ties with the United States for years. The Arab states were afraid that if they attacked Israel, the United States would defend it. The United States did tell Israel that it would defend it, but only if it was attacked. If Israel struck first, it would be alone in whatever war followed. As President Johnson repeatedly told them, I must emphasize the necessity for Israel not to make itself responsible for the initiation of hostilities. Israel will not be alone unless it decides to go it alone. We cannot imagine that it will make this decision. But the situation kept escalating. After visiting Cairo, Jordan's King Hussein gave a summary. All of the Arab armies now surround Israel. Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Yemen, Lebanon, Algeria, Sudan, and Kuwait. There is no difference between one Arab people and another. No difference between one Arab army and another. Israelis had to decide, let themselves be struck and be forced to trust the United States, or strike first and risk fighting the Arab states alone. The stakes were so high and the outcome so uncertain that even the IDF's chief of staff, Rabin, a man in a position typically requiring composure, suffered a nervous breakdown and was given tranquilizers by his doctor. There was intense argument among the Israeli high command. A decision had to be made. The Air Force commander weighed in. All the signs indicate that the Egyptians are ready to strike. We have no option but to attack at once. Moshe Dayan had just been promoted as Minister of Defense, taking the role from Prime Minister Eshkol, who had been perceived as uncertain and weak. Dayan, by contrast, was a cheerful hawk.
Well, they have plenty of tanks and troops and everything, too much, too many, and we have much less than they have. Much depends, of course, where is the battle.
Dayan agreed. Israel had to attack. It is our only chance to win, he said, to wage this war our way. A vote was held. Israel would attack. They knew the decision would be internationally condemned. But as another high-ranking official put it, they will condemn us, and we will survive. On June 5th, 1967, Egyptian pilots eating breakfast were suddenly witness to their planes and airfields being destroyed. Israel had sent virtually its entire air force into Egypt, a risk leaving its own country undefended. The pilots had flown low, sometimes just 40 meters or so off the ground, to avoid radar. Their attack caught Egypt completely off guard. It came from both the north and east and struck airfields all across the country simultaneously. Jordan had actually detected the attack, but lack of organization between governments meant that Egypt was never warned. Operation Focus, as it had been called, fared far better than Israelis had expected. In terms of damage done, it exceeded expectations by almost 100%.
It's that self-interest
Within a
again,
few hours,
but it's
the
super
Israeli
understandable.
Air Force commander reported the results to Rabin. The Egyptian Air Force has ceased to exist. Egypt, though, through radio, reported the attack to be a failure and falsely reported successes of its own. Syria had already minimally struck Israel. Iraq was committed to war by treaty. But in the context of Egypt's false reporting, Jordan, crucially, joined too.
What's the radio saying about what's happened?
23 airmen for Israel.
23?
23 now.
Airplanes?
Yes, airplanes.
But with Egypt's air force out of the fight, Israel was free to swing its air force towards Syria and Jordan, crippling their air forces as well. In the first day of fighting alone, it reported, 400 Arab planes had been destroyed. Israel had immediately established air supremacy. In a conventional war fought in the open expanses of the Middle East, air supremacy is decisive. The Arab states, with their ground armies, stood little chance. The war that followed, tellingly called the Six-Day War, was so one-sided that it presented Israel with unexpected options. Options that required it to make decisions with far-reaching implications spontaneously. For example, the Egyptian army in the Sinai was collapsing. They were in full retreat. How should Israelis respond? The entire Sinai Peninsula, up to the Suez Canal, it seemed, was more or less open to take. The IDF was already in the Sinai Peninsula, chasing the Egyptian army. Dayan thought taking the whole peninsula risked war with the Soviets, and told the army to stay away from the Suez Canal. But a patrol had reached it anyway. Time was pressing. A UN ceasefire could be called at any moment. What should Israel do? Under pressure, Dayan canceled his own order. He ordered the IDF forward, taking the entire peninsula, all the way up to the Suez Canal. There was also Jordan to consider. Israel had lost East Jerusalem to Jordan during the First Arab-Israeli War, splitting the city in two. Now, without an air force and without Egypt, Jordan seemed compromised. Suddenly, taking all of Jerusalem seemed like a real possibility. But again, Dayan first said no, thinking the international community wouldn't tolerate it. While Israelis debated the issue, he was approached by a revisionist, Menachem Begin, who apparently helped change his mind. He sent the IDF into Jerusalem and, through intense fighting, captured the entire city, including the Old City and its holy sites, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish. Reaching the Wailing Wall, the site of the ancient Jewish sacred Second Temple, the soldiers found themselves overcome with emotion. They sang their national anthem while a rabbi offered a prayer. Blessed art thou who comforts Zion and builds Jerusalem. A paratroop commander made an announcement over radio that would go on to be iconic in Israeli culture. The Temple Mount is in our hands. Jordan also held the West Bank. Taking it from Jordan seemed militarily easy, and the question was spontaneously debated by Israeli High Command. It would mean occupying a considerable stretch of more or less exclusively Arab-Palestinian land. How do we control 1 million Arabs? Rabin asked. A staff officer corrected him. 1,250,000. No one had an answer. But it was a time, it seemed, of seizing opportunities. The IDF was ordered to take it. Then there was Syria. Syria owned the Golan Heights, a mountain range that overlooked northern Israeli communities. They had been used by Syria historically as a launching point for attacks. Israel now considered taking the Golan Heights, but Dayan thought Syrian resistance would be too intense and blocked it. Then they intercepted a message from Nasser to the Syrian president saying, "I believe that Israel is about to concentrate all its forces against Syria in order to destroy the Syrian army, and regard for the common cause obliges me to advise you to agree to the ending of hostilities and to inform the UN Secretary General immediately in order to preserve Syria's great army. We have lost this battle. May God help us in the future." Apparently sensing weakness, Dayan again flipped his decision. Writing to Eshkol, he said, "In my opinion, this cable obliges us to capture the maximal military lines. Yesterday, I did not think that Egypt and Syria would collapse in this way and give up the continuation of the campaign. But since this is the situation, it must be exploited to the full." Israelis had exploited Arab weakness in pursuing their own national interests, and had put little thought, by necessity, into the consequences. It had been an astounding victory through military might, and a war that they had won, more or less alone. And it netted them a reward. By the end of the war, thanks to their new territories, Israel had more than tripled in size. Nasser declined in influence, never to fully recover. Egypt declined with him, as did Pan-Arabism, to be replaced to some extent by Saudi Arabia as the next dominant Arab power, and Islamism as the next dominant ideology, which blamed Arab nationalism's failure on its secular nature. By the end of the 60s, Israel developed nuclear weapons, a fact that became widely recognized in the 70s, making Israel less of a target for conventional ground wars. The war established the importance of the Middle East in the Cold War. The Soviet Union became more involved supporting Arab states, while the United States developed close ties with Israel, seeing it as a powerful democratic ally that helpfully had ties with American Jewry, meaning policy decisions in favor of Israel could swing American voters. Israel would go on to develop a large lobby in the United States, precisely for that purpose. The US began making major arms deals with Israel, further strengthening it. The Arab states tried war with Israel once more in 1973, but their aims were much more limited. Israel's military strength and American backing meant conquering it was increasingly unrealistic. Arab states, beginning with Egypt, began signing peace deals with Israel, formally recognizing its existence and, more or less, ending hostilities. Egypt received, as a trade-off for that peace, the land it had lost in the Six-Day War. But Israel was conflicted about giving up anything else. The territories that they had gained so spontaneously now posed the Israeli polity a problem, a dilemma. There were two major arguments about what to do with the territories, arguments that conflicted with one another. The problem was, both arguments on their own seemed correct. The first argument went, holding the territories was necessary to keep Israel safe. If they kept the Golan Heights, for example, it would give Israelis a buffer between themselves and Syria, and take from Syrians a point that had been previously used for attacks. Holding the Golan Heights could give Israelis defensive value, while also helpfully securing access to water. Israel also held the Gaza Strip, a small and dense piece of land with debatable strategic value. But the value of the West Bank was clear. To understand why, you can just look at a map. Israel, especially without the West Bank, is a small state, around 290 miles long, or around 470 kilometers. Its important and dense urban centers, including Tel Aviv, run across its narrow middle, an area in its narrowest just around 9 miles wide, or around 15 kilometers. A space so small that it leaves no room for an army to maneuver. Despite having fought 2 wars in 20 years, Israel and Jordan historically had a strong relationship. The best of enemies, some called it. Jordan had governed the West Bank up until that point. But after the Six-Day War, its sovereignty would collapse back into Jordan. While Jordan had held the West Bank, Israel had felt relatively secure. But if Israel didn't control the West Bank, and Jordan didn't control the West Bank, it meant that the Arab world, with all the threat and instability that it implied for Israel, would extend all the way up to its narrowest borders, all the way up to its vital urban centers. Given the history of violence and aggression towards Israel until then, the argument that it needed the territories for its own defense seemed sound. How could they let Palestinians, a people hostile to them, control land that went right up to Tel Aviv? But then there was the counter-argument, which ran, the fact of occupying those territories, with all it entails, makes the people living there, and the Arab world more broadly, more hostile to Israel. Arab well-being aside, that hostility makes Israel less safe. Arab Palestinians may have tolerated Jordanian and Egyptian rule, but they would be far less tolerant of Israeli rule. There was also the one-sided nature of the occupation. It would be Israel, which had become more or less a regional superpower, occupying people without a state, people with a struggling or even collapsing economy, an economy that would be dependent on Israel. Given the lopsided dynamic and given human nature, tension and abuses of power were more or less inevitable. Unless Israelis treated Palestinians as equals, which they would not, Palestinians were almost guaranteed to turn against Israelis more and more over time. Also, the more Israel abused its power, the more it would cause something like a moral corruption. Israelis had held themselves on the moral high ground in the conflicts up until that point. It would be harder and harder to make that case the longer the occupations went on. The rest of the world would also reliably condemn Israel for its abuses of power, further isolating Israel over time on the world stage. All of which, in sum, makes Israel less safe. One could argue that Israel should just annex those territories, making the people there citizens. But that wasn't seen as a realistic solution. Annexing would mean incorporating millions of people into Israel who were hostile to it, who would also likely tip the demographic balance, making Jews in Israel democratically lose control of their state. So what should Israelis do? On one hand, people argued, Israel couldn't afford to let go of the territories. And on the other, people argued, it couldn't afford to keep them. So what's the solution? The question would go on to haunt Israelis, bitterly polarizing their politics, well into the 21st century. The third and final development that we're going to cover is the reemergence of Palestinian nationalism. On July 22nd, 1968, news of a plane hijacking grabbed world attention. It was an Israeli airliner flying from Rome to Tel Aviv. The group responsible was called the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. In a way, it was a birth of a new era. It was the first plane hijacking done for the sake of creating a political spectacle. As a tactic for gaining attention, it worked. The drama played well into the age of television. There would be more to come. 2 years later, 4 more planes were hijacked and flown to an airstrip in Jordan. The release of the hostages was negotiated. Then the planes, in front of television cameras, were exploded. It was, in a way, you could say, naturally disturbing. The hostages were civilians. But it also naturally raised a question. What was motivating the hijackers? If their aims were political, what did they want? It had seemed that, since 1948, Palestine and Palestinian nationalism had been disappearing. Palestinians didn't have a state. They had no prominent leader. The Arab League claimed to speak for them. But in practice, the Arab states tended to privilege their own needs over the needs of Palestinians. Israelis widely, perhaps ignorantly, or perhaps willfully, ignored the issue. And the rest of the world, for the most part, did the same. Palestine, at least as an issue being taken seriously, had been quiet. In 1969, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir spoke to at least a widespread Israeli opinion at the time when she said, "There was no such thing as Palestinians. It is not as though there was a Palestinian people in Palestine, considering itself as a Palestinian people, and we came and threw them out and took their country from them. They did not exist." Which you could say is actually true in the very limited sense, that when Israel made its state, Palestinians weren't yet widely calling themselves Palestinians. The idea that they were a national group was still relatively new. They were widely still just called Arabs in Palestine. But in the decades that had passed, Palestinians, if anything, had come closer together. The Nakba, in particular, was central to that. It had both a bonding and a brutalizing effect on Palestinians. As a nationalist leader who had witnessed an expulsion in the town of Lydda recalled, "The Israelis came to Lydda and forced us to flee. It is a picture that does not leave my mind and that I will never forget. 30,000 people walking, crying, screaming with terror, women carrying babies on their arms, and children clinging to their skirts, with the Israeli soldiers pointing their weapons at their backs. Some people fell by the wayside, and some did not rise again. It was terrible. If you see such things, your mind and heart alter. So what use is it to treat a sick body when such things happen? Humans must change the world. They must do something. They must kill if needs be. To kill, even if that means that we, in our turn, become inhuman." Palestinians would tell and retell their stories, their family stories, and their neighbor stories about the Nakba. It became for Palestinians a foundational story, a myth at the foundations of their national culture. It was a story that gave them a common goal, to reclaim their land, and a common enemy, the Israelis who had taken it. There was even an ideology to blame: Zionism. It was Zionism that brought Jews to Palestine. It was Zionism that brought national distinctions to Palestine. And it was Zionism that, for national reasons, caused Jews to push Arabs out of Palestine. Palestinians had placed their hopes in the Arab states since 1948. But with the disaster of 1967, placing Palestinians under Israeli rule, and the fall of Nasser and Pan-Arabism, it seemed they had to take matters into their own hands. A radical few then, typically inspired by the Algerian Revolution or by anti-colonialist Marxism, tried to bring about change for Palestinians through violence.
He's hoping to go back to Palestine this very year. How does he think he's going to do that? كيف تظن أنك ستعود إلى فلسطين؟ كيف تظن أنك ستعود إلى فلسطين؟ في طريق التحرير. He is going to liberate Palestine. How is he going to liberate it? Well, with a force of arms or how? كيف يمكنك تحرير فلسطين يا ترى بطريق السلاح؟ بطريق السلاح نعم. Yes, by force of arms.
As nationalist groups sprung up to organize violence, an umbrella organization was made by Egypt and the Arab League to represent them. the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. So as Palestinians were deciding to take matters into their own hands, an organization more or less immediately appeared that claimed to represent them. It was an organization whose stance on violence was clear. As the 1968 PLO charter put it, armed struggle is the only way to liberate Palestine. Thus, it is the overall strategy, not merely a tactical phase. Commando action constitutes the nucleus of the Palestinian Popular Liberation War. These nationalist groups then paired high-profile, international-facing acts, like the plane hijackings, with hundreds of smaller operations against Israelis, typically targeting civilians, bombing buses, marketplaces, attacking schools. There were acts that raised their profile more locally, both for Israelis and Palestinians. A group called Fatah had fought the Israeli army in 1968 and fared surprisingly well. The battle became heroic in the Palestinian national story, and it catapulted Fatah's leader, a man named Yasser Arafat, into the role of Palestinians' leading national figure. Arafat saw himself as something of a democratic consensus builder, trying to sense the broad wills of Palestinians around him, then act in step with them. It was a philosophy he gained, he said, from studying the mistakes of the past. For example, saying, "In the Great Revolt of 1936, our Palestinian leadership was divided, and the rival groups fought each other. Because of this internal fighting, many of our leaders were assassinated. After studying these matters, I made a vow that my generation would never repeat the mistakes of the past." Having achieved fame, at least in Palestine and the Arab world, he associated himself and Fatah with the PLO. Fatah became the PLO's leading organization. Arafat was elected the PLO chairman. The PLO was now clearly the leading national organization, and Arafat its elected leader. Palestine had gained some attention from the world after the plane hijackings in 1968 and 1970. In 1972, world opinion would be riveted. A group called the Black September Organization, seemingly loosely affiliated with the PLO, kidnapped and eventually killed 11 members of the Israeli team in the Munich Olympics after a failed rescue attempt by the German police. As an act, it was overwhelmingly condemned. Arafat denied involvement, then, perhaps in a contradiction, successfully put a stop to high-profile international terrorism. But Palestine was gaining attention, and some parts of the world, Arab, African, and communist especially, were sympathetic. In 1975, those sympathetic states invited the PLO to UN Assembly. Palestinians had gone from being practically invisible in 1967 to having their leaders speak at the UN 8 years later. And it was Arafat and nationalist organizations who had done it. They had done it through a sworn commitment to violence. Arafat gave a blockbuster performance. He shouldn't be understood as a terrorist, he said. He was a revolutionary, fighting a colonial movement. He wore a gun holster. He closed his speech saying, "I come here bearing an olive branch and a freedom fighter's gun. Do not let the olive branch fall from my hand. Do not let the olive branch fall from my hand. Do not let the olive branch fall from my hand." He was given a standing ovation. It was clear that Palestinians were a people that Israelis could no longer ignore. The Palestinian issue had to be confronted. As a Palestinian newspaper put it, Palestine has re-entered history. But what did Palestinians want? Since almost the beginning, the Arab approach to the conflict had been to take a hard line. There could be no compromising with Jews. It was Arab land, and they would settle for nothing less than all of Palestine. But in terms of their ultimate aims, decades of hardline policy had seemingly failed. Palestine was still weak, even non-existent, while Israel was getting stronger and stronger. Some prominent Palestinians then were seeking compromise. The prominent intellectual and activist, Sari Nusseibeh, for example, recalled his father advising the PLO after the Six-Day War, saying, "Go straight for negotiations with Israel for a two-state solution, and do it now. If you wait, the Israeli position will harden." But the PLO at the time took the popular hardline. As Arafat put it, Palestine, all of Palestine, is Arab. But that raised a question. How could Palestinians get rid of Israel? The great powers of the world weren't doing it. The Arab states had tried but failed. Palestinians, with no formal army and no state of their own, were the least powerful of all. They were the least able to do it. As the 70s went on, it became increasingly clear, at least among critical thinkers, that there was no apparent path, no foreseeable chain of events that could get rid of Israel. Ideas of compromise began spreading among Palestinian leaders, notably articulated to Western audiences in 1978 in a foreign affairs article called Thinking the Unthinkable. The unthinkable for Palestinians being a two-state solution. The PLO, too, was adjusting. In 1974, they officially adopted a smaller Palestinian state as their goal, but even then qualified that goal as being temporary. Their ultimate aim officially was still to govern all of Palestine. The PLO, meanwhile, kept inciting a hard line among Palestinians. For example, speaking to the public in the 1980s, saying, "We will never compromise with the Zionist entity," and "We'll fight to the last man," while quietly scaling back its own expectations and seeking paths for compromise. But as Palestinians were finally warming to compromise as a solution, Israelis found themselves less willing than ever to accept it. The occupied territories had originally been seen as bargaining chips for Israel to trade for peace. But the longer Israelis held them, the harder it was, they found, to let them go. Beyond the practical arguments that were spreading about the defensive value they held, a new form of Zionism rose that made it ever more difficult to get rid of them. Zionism from the beginning had been an overwhelmingly secular movement. All of the leading figures, from Herzl to Chaim Weizmann and Ben-Gurion, were atheist, or at least non-religious. In some ways, the State of Israel recognizes religion and the religious foundation of the Israeli nation. Israel's flag, for example, is designed to evoke a Jewish prayer shawl. But religion was thought to be something in decline, something that, if given enough time, would more or less go away. Religious Jews had also traditionally ignored or avoided Zionism. The traditional view was that a Messiah had to return Jews to Palestine. A return being led by a secular figure, like Theodor Herzl, was seen as heretical. So Zionism and religion from the beginning were an awkward fit and naturally separated. But the longer Israel existed, the more it gained acceptance among religious Israelis, which over time made them become more assertive, more involved in Israeli politics. Israel, furthermore, had been experiencing success, even spectacular success. So much so that, to many, it started to seem miraculous. A new interpretation of events started surfacing. Their first major proponent was a cerebral rabbi named Abraham Isaac Kook, who mostly wrote in the early 20th century. Kook experienced the rise of Zionism, but died before the State of Israel was made. Judaism as a religion, he thought, was declining. It had to be revived, and it would only be revived through Zionism. It had to make a transition from being a religion based in the diaspora to being a religion based in the soil of Israel. Through that, he thought, the Jewish people would experience a revival. The real and organic holiness of Jewry, he said, can become manifest only by the return of the people to its land, the only path that could lead to its renaissance. Hope can only be found, he said, in Eretz Israel. In a twist, he argued that despite appearances, Zionism was a religious process. It may appear to be secular, but it was in fact sacred. All Jews were connected to God, he said, whether they realized it or not, and God compelled them to act. Deep in the heart of every Jew, he said, in its purest and holiest recesses, there blazes the fire of Israel. There can be no mistaking its demands for an organic and indivisible bond between life and all of God's commandments. For the pouring of the Spirit of the Lord, the Spirit of Israel, which completely permeates the soul of the Jew, into all the vessels which were created for this particular purpose, and for expressing the word of Israel fully and precisely in the realms of action and idea. Cook thought it was the duty of Jews to get in touch with that voice and to act. The time is ripe, he said. Everlasting light, the true light of God, the light of God of Israel, revealed by his wondrous people, must rise to the level of consciousness. No man who is responsive to the demands of his own soul can be silent at this great hour. He must cry out to the slumbering powers of our people. Awake and rise to your task. For Cook, in a sense, the goal was classically Zionist, colonizing Palestine and creating a state for a Jewish nation. But Cook was maximalist. He thought that God's will dictated that Jews had an uncompromising right to all of Palestine in its entirety, and furthermore, had an imperative to take it. In a manifesto, he wrote, "We demand full restitution for the land which has been robbed from us. The crime which cries unto heaven must be completely corrected. Our precious, holy land, full of wonder and splendor, our pride, our human rights and human dignity, must be returned to us fully, without compromise, without hypocrisy, entirely, in all completeness." Cook, though, was a minor figure in Zionist politics. He himself never effected change. His ideas may have remained obscure had his charismatic son, Tzvi Yehuda Cook, not simplified them and organized them after his death. Their ideas, articulated by both father and son, became known as Cookism. Cookism found a moment in history when Israel, after the Six-Day War, found itself with these new territories and found itself wondering what to do with them. The answer.
To anyone watching, I'm just completely super interested in this, so that's why I'm not talking very much. I'm sorry. Terrible commentary.
Religious Zionists said was
this
that
guy's
Israel
video is
had
incredible.
not only a right to the territories, but a duty to take them, to incorporate them into Israel. Cookism was especially resonant for religious Jews, since most of the important biblical sites, like Jericho, Hebron, and Bethlehem, were not actually in the state of Israel established by the UN, but were in the West Bank. To many religious Israelis, it seemed that had to be some kind of mistake. On the eve of the Six-Day War, Tzvi Yehuda Cook had cried out to his followers, lamenting what he saw as the fragmented Israeli state, saying, "Where is our Hebron, Shechem, Jericho, and Anathoth, torn from the state in 1948, as we lay maimed and bleeding?" Just days later, Israel suddenly and unexpectedly gained those territories, and Cook's words seemed prophetic. It seemed to Cook's followers that Dayan, the IDF, and the State of Israel really were doing God's work. They were reconnecting the Jewish people to their ancient Holy Land. Cook's followers then saw it as their turn to rise up and take the lead. They would take the lead by seeing to it that Israel would not part with that land. "All of this land is ours," Tzvi Yehuda said. "Absolutely, belonging to all of us. It is non-transferable to others, even in part. It is an inheritance to us from our forefathers. Once and for all, it is clear that there are no Arab territories or Arab lands, but only the land of Israel, to which others have come and upon which they have built without our permission in our absence." In terms of nationalist politics, religious Zionists are on the far right. They're extremely particularistic, doing what accords with Jewish needs and demands as dictated by their beliefs. The interests of Arabs essentially don't factor in at all. Shortly after the Six-Day War, religious Zionists started taking matters into their own hands. They would actualize their belief that the land was theirs by simply moving into it. It was sometimes done with government approval, even tacit approval, and was sometimes done illegally. They moved into the land and argued that they, as Jews, had a right to it. The first site, in 1967, was in the town of Kfar Etzion, where Jews had been driven out by Arabs in 1948. In the first night in the dormitory, they hung a picture on the wall of Tzvi Yehuda Cook. At first, it was a relatively slow process. In the first 10 years, about 75 settlements were made, housing around 11,000 people. But it would accelerate over time. By the 21st century, hundreds of thousands of Israelis would be living in the occupied territories, making what's known collectively as the settlements. A prominent group leading the process emerged in 1974 called Gush Emanim, Hebrew for Block of the Faithful. They claimed a deep connection between land and body, inspired by the Cooks. As a founder put it, the entire matter of the land of Israel is a mysterious issue whose basis is a spiritual attachment to matter and soil. If one goes deeply into the understanding of the relation between the body and the soul, or of the relationship between man and woman, and penetrates the mystery of the unity of matter and spirit, one is able to understand the love and appreciation for each part of the land of Israel, just as there is value for every limb of the human body. The land of Israel has an element of life in it and is tied to spirit, so that a surrender of any part of it is like giving up a living organ. Many wanted to incorporate the settlements into the state of Israel. Many wanted even for the project to go much further. How far exactly was a matter of debate. In some passages in the Bible, God had promised Abraham's Jewish lineage vast stretches of land. In one passage, from the Nile in Egypt, all the way to the Euphrates in Iraq. Those who believed that Israel would expand that far were few, but many began advocating for an expanded Israel, an Israel that should incorporate at least the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. A term began circulating that put name to that vision.
Greater Israel.
Term was Greater Israel.
Yeah.
The spearhead of the Greater Israel movement was the settlers. Palestinians under occupation were powerless to stop them. The body responsible for stopping them was the State of Israel. The Israeli government would sometimes stop and remove settlements, but for the most part, it did not. They were allowed at first because, as they argued, the settlements would create a sort of defensive line, a buffer between themselves and Arabs. They knew what they were doing was against international law, but their past history, they thought, taught them they could get away with it. As a high-ranking official put it,
האם היית אומר שהמבחן שעמדנו בו את העולם עבר בהצלחה? כלומר, אפשר להקים יישובים בלי לזכות
לדעתי כן. כן. על זאת עמדנו כבר די מוקדם.
Over time, that logic fell out of favor, at least with the Israeli left. But the settlements would continue to find enduring support from the State of Israel. Support largely due to the structure of Israeli politics. Religious Zionists are represented by a party, the National Religious Party. They've always been a smaller Israeli party, but because of the structure of Israeli politics, minorities can be powerful. Israel has a multi-party, proportional representation system. Parties gain power, seats in the Knesset, proportional to how many votes they get. Because there are many parties, and even smaller parties are getting seats, none of the bigger parties can win a majority on their own. To win a majority and govern then, bigger parties have to make coalitions with smaller ones. But in that system, the smaller parties have leverage over the bigger ones. If for some reason the smaller parties decide to withdraw their support, the bigger parties can lose their majority and their government can fall. Left-wing coalitions, led by the Labour Party, and at first Ben-Gurion, dominated Israeli politics for about the first 30 years. They were considered left not because they were particularly left-wing in their nationalist policies, but because they were socialists. And because there were nationalists in Israeli politics, like revisionists who were further right. After 3 decades of continuous power, in the late 70s, the Israeli left fell. They had mishandled, many thought, the War of 1973, a war that had caught them off guard. Their socialist policies, too, came into question and were seen as failing. Ethnicity emerged as another factor. There are 3 major Jewish ethnicities in Israel. Ashkenazis, who generally come from the north of Israel, Europe. Sephardis, who generally come from the west of Israel, like Portugal, Spain, and West Africa. And Mizrahis, who generally come from the east of Israel, namely the Middle East. Ben-Gurion's attempt to fuse everyone together into one essentially Ashkenazi culture had failed. By the 70s, Sephardis and Mizrahis, feeling resentful, searched for representation that they mostly found on the right. Mizrahis would go on to form their own powerful political party, Shas. Shas on the settlers was generally dovish, but for religious reasons, typically joined coalitions on the right. Religious Israelis in general also became more prominent and shifted their views right, from dovishness before the Six-Day War to some of the most hawkish views in Israel after.
Okay, I'm going.